The Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business, a show on the Hogsty Network. This is the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports industrial complex that we both love and loathe. I am joined by my compatriots in Gab, Steve and Rich. How you doing, fellows?
Doing great. Happy to be here. It's been some great football. Been enjoying it. So nothing like a little break in between games to record IJB.
Yeah, there's we've as we record this, we have the Sunday afternoon game between the Saints and the Vikings has not been played yet, but we've had 2 out of 3 been really great games thus far. The only one bad was the New England game, so that was good. And I'm always personally happy when I can see the Pittsburgh Steelers fans suffer. So I mean that makes me happy.
Absolutely, and it's a 3-day weekend. It's for me at least. It's I'm off tomorrow, so that's great too.
What are you slacking or what? Oh, it's school.
It's a holiday, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The interesting, as we transition into our topics today, one interesting thing is, I really hate that they have to put the Patriots on prime time regardless of the matchup, because anybody that looked at any of these 4 games would have known that seeing Tennessee Titans versus New England on your prime time Saturday slot was a total loser.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's what can you say? I'm so tired of the New England Patriots, first of all, but we've called that on the Hogsty. Clearly, Titans Patriots was going to be a nothing game. Everybody knew that. Everybody should have known that, but it's the business part of it is that frankly the ratings for the any Patriots game and any Dallas Cowboy game are going to be noticeably higher, and so you put that on the primetime slot, which makes me physically ill, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
I do think I don't want to get lost too much in it. Maybe, well, you know what? We can revisit this in the Gallup part. So let's get on to our topics for today. We're going to talk about 3 topics as per our norm. And the first thing we're going to talk about is a story that we've been keeping tabs on and we've talked about in past episodes, and that is the International Olympic Committee's full ban of the country of Russia because of doping and performance-enhancing drugs for this 2018 Winter Olympics. Now, the interesting part is that they have announced that clean players are allowed to compete, but they can't compete for the country of Russia, thus wear the flag, wear the uniform. There's no unified sort of patriotic team fielded by the country of Russia. But what's happened is that this ruling, they confirmed on December 5th that players are allowed to compete, but they're completely opaque about how they're making those decisions, how those players will compete, if those players can compete for other countries, how certain quotas for the number of athletes from certain countries are allowed to go down. Also, the competitors in the countries aren't exactly sure who their actual competition will be because they still haven't announced in full what clean players will be competing. So my question to you, the panel, was it worth what looks to be a little bit like a toothless ban to go this heavy and throw not only a sport but a whole sporting competition into this much confusion only weeks away from the games? Was it worth it? Was it an effective penalty for this problem?
Well, first of all, newsflash, the International Olympic Committee makes things difficult and doesn't know what they're doing. Details at 11. I don't understand the point behind allowing unflagged clean players to compete. And this has nothing to do with Russia. I'm all, pro-America, yes. But putting that aside, if the Russian team is going to get banned for mass doping, fine, ban them. I don't understand. To me, the spirit of the Olympic Games is for all different countries around the world to come together in the spirit of harmony and compete in some sort of athletic purity for the sake of international togetherness, basically, if you will. And I don't really get the point of having unflagged players compete, particularly when, like you just said, Chris, it's sort of like an end around about what happened. You either ban them or don't ban them. I have no faith that the Olympic Committee can, even if it's a good idea, I have no faith that the Olympic Committee can actually do this in such a way that makes sense. Because to me, okay, so let the Russian, track team come in. Well, what's their logistical support going to be? Who's going to be their coaches? Who's going to be their whatever, team managers they have? It's just going to be the same Russians that, they had before. So I don't get it at all. I think that's incredibly stupid.
I have, to echo sort of what Steve is saying, I have zero confidence that the IOC is legit, clean themselves, and are on the up and up. So that's always, see, to me, I think the athletes have been excessively punished over the years in these doping schemes, and not to say that they shouldn't, but it's the committee members, and you hear things about these international committees being corrupt and taking kickbacks, but to me, that's the head of the snake, and I think the athletes are collateral damage. But so again, either ban them or you don't.
Yeah, I think we're gonna score a bit of a hat trick here in terms of our opinion. I think this makes zero sense, and the quota thing is really interesting because often in different sports, there you can only like in figure skating, you can only send 3 per country. Well, now with unaffiliated athletes, you could conceivably have more actual Russians competing than would have been allowed to underneath the flag. So they meant to this ban, and then they gave this out clause with the clean athletes, but they didn't look at any of the other structural parts that legislate the Olympic Games, and those, it's just dominoes. It's like pulling a thread and then starting to see it all unravel because they didn't think this through.
No, you're exactly right. And like I said before, I'll go back to one of my original points, which is I don't even understand the point of competing in the Olympics and not for a country. I think the entire purpose of the Olympics is the spirit of friendly international competition. And if you're going to be there just on your own, it sort of defeats the entire purpose of having the games in the first place. So, and you're right. Yeah. I mean, what about the quotas? So, you could, like, countries can send 3, I think, for 3 athletes per sprinting event, for example. Who's to say, like you said, there aren't going to be 8 Russians in the 100 now because they're unflagged. So let's just send everybody, and maybe one of them will win.
But what's interesting is I never understood, and maybe you guys can help me. The Olympics, and Steve, you said that the Olympics should be about amateur athletes coming together, playing for country. But for as far back as I can think, it's been political. And it always seems to be a political element to it. Whoever has the biggest political muscle tends to, for instance, this wouldn't be an issue if, let's just say, Guam, sorry, that's a U.S. territory. Let's just say maybe this wouldn't be an issue if Ethiopia was banned. You know what I'm saying? It's Russia. They're a major world player. So I never was under the illusion that it was just about athleticism, competition for a country. There's always been some type of political backdrop with this.
Maybe it's me being naive, and maybe you're exactly right. Because certainly it was political. The U.S. boycotted the 1980 Olympics for political reasons. Or wait, no, did I have it? Yeah, we boycotted 1980, and then the Russians boycotted 1984 purely for political reasons. That's exactly right, and that's certainly true. But nonetheless, maybe it's just my utopian fantasy, I guess. But there's always been political elements. You had, the 2 American athletes with the raised fists, and what was that, 68?
68,
yeah, and then you had, the German-sponsored games, in 38, was it 38?
Yeah, it was before the war.
Yeah, before World War II. And so, yes, it's always been there. But, I mean, the idea behind it is to get past all that. And I just wish it was
both, right?
Is it both, though, really?
You can't. Well, you can't. If you're going to have an international competition, obviously international politics are going to, it can be both aspirational, and I think often is, and it's too difficult to untangle some of those political pieces. And it also actually raises the drama, right? Like, that's what made the United States versus the USSR in Olympic competition so tense, so great, right? It's why the Miracle on Ice was so amazing. And that's fine to hold that tension. That doesn't mean you have to not regulate the sports properly.
Right.
Like, we should be able to separate out those things. And I agree with you, Steve, completely. Like, the whole point is countries competing. If we're letting individual people compete, then let's just say, then we just blow away the idea of having countries compete and just say we're going to bring the best 25 athletes in whatever discipline, and they'll compete, and it's more of an individualistic thing. And that's what this has created. This is the kind of unintended consequences that you can imagine 20 years from now. We don't have countries competing because of decisions like this that bring the whole thing into question. And it's also the IOC was lazy. You should have been you can't go and if you can decide who's clean to compete, you can decide who's dirty and just let Russia compete with clean athletes.
Well, I mean, if they get to the point where they think that the entire Russian Olympic delegation, generally speaking, is dirty, I have no problem with the Olympic Committee banning them, if it's truly that bad. I have since it's just business, and we do talk about sports law and business here, there may be a business reason behind this. Think about this. The Russians have a population of how much? Hundreds of millions of people at least, right? A lot of whom who are watching TV, and a lot of whom who want to watch their athletes in their country compete. And so if the Olympic Committee bans every Russian, that's a significant chunk of business gone, and a significant chunk of ad revenue gone, and that affects the whoever's broadcasting the Olympics in Russia, and all the advertisers and all that stuff. So if I can be a cynic for a minute, and newsflash, Steve's a cynic, That's another thing that, some of you out there may know about me. But it may be more that they're trying to keep the ratings up in Eastern Europe. How about that?
Sure, I buy that for $1.
But you know what, though? I also think, but here's the other thing, and in fairness to the athletes, do these athletes really care? I think they care that everybody's clean, and they want everybody they don't want anyone to have a competitive advantage. But you got to think, man, these athletes have been training for this all their lives. And for some, this is all they have. And many of them have made, sacrifices. It's just unfortunate that at the top, the IOC and some of these countries and the representation just can't get it right.
I hear you, but part of me doesn't care. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry that the Russian curling team may miss out, but I mean, at some point, look, the IOC, we've talked about on this show about how corrupt the IOC is, and that includes, the U.S. delegation has been involved in it too. I mean, with the Salt Lake City games where Mitt Romney had to swoop in and fix it, at the last minute, years ago. I mean, the U.S. is not a saint, and certainly the U.S. has had its share of drug scandals, particularly in the U.S. track team, more than any other. But look, I mean, you have to set an example at some point in time. You have to.
Well, what's interesting is, and just a pop culture sort of with this, my daughter and I watched Race together about Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics.
The movie Race?
The movie Race, it's called Race. And what was interesting is, I mean, of course, everyone knows about the athletic part of it, but it talked a little bit about the backdoor deals that they had to make for the United States to even participate in that Olympics because of the whole issues with Jews and things like that, which was going on in Germany. But all of that to say, just all of the backdoor deals, money making, favors and things that go on with the IOC, and unfortunately, the athletes suffer.
They do. I mean, I get it, and I do feel sorry for them, but to a certain extent. But it's just, to me, I mean, if the problem is that bad. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be really bad, because the IOC has busted East Germany years ago. They busted China. they've busted major scandals in big countries before, and they've never just outright banned an entire delegation before.
Let everybody use. Let everybody use. That's what we should do. Just let everybody use, and then we'll be on the
Great example. Great
Hey, you're not
example.
far off from. If you listen to our last topic on this conversation on this, you're not far off from my opinion.
Yeah.
All right, so we will watch this. I have a feeling that this will flare up, and we will have definitely a few sports controversies that arise from this confusion, because the one thing is just the IOCs with their pants down. They did not prepare for this. They did not understand unintended consequences, and they were not. They did not have the backbone enough to actually enforce this, and so this mid-ground milquetoast has got them in all kinds of problems.
Let me ask you this before we move on. On a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being, I could give a rat's you know what, how much do you really care about or would watch Olympic sports? How much do you care about
Olympic sports?
How much do you, not about the business part, but actually watching it and sitting and
I
putting in hours?
I love the Olympics. I watch a lot of it. So I would give it like a 9.
Summer,
yeah, probably about
9.
Summer and winter both. Yeah, I watch them all.
I'm 9 on both too.
Okay, I'm about an 8 on summer and about a 6 on winter.
Yeah, that's fair. But my point. No, of course I forgot my point.
Sorry,
I had a good point. Yeah, no, that's right. It's slipping my mind. Now go ahead, Chris. I can't remember what I was going to say. So, I remember what this is the same. Remember, if you want an example of how mixed up and stupid the International Olympic Committee is, go back to this past Olympics in Brazil. You won it in Brazil. I mean, this is the same group of people that were fine with having open water competition in diseased, infected water that could kill people. And nobody thought that was even bad. And
good point. You're good point.
This is the same group of people that set that up. So it's not surprising to me that they have screwed this issue up by, via the quota problems and all that. It should surprise no one.
It really should surprise no one. I agree on that one. And we will see. We'll probably track it. Probably have a little bit of an update or some version of this as the Winter Olympics open, I believe on February 8th on NBC. All right, we're going to move on. Really interesting Gallup poll came out this week. It's a poll that I think they did last time in 2008. It's something that they do every couple years or do every chunk of time. And it kind of looks at the popularity of different sports in America. And the big takeaway here was that football is still king. All the headlines that had articles about this did say football still reigns even after taking a hit. So there was still that kind of good news, bad news report. But it does back it up that football is still king and also has some really interesting demographic breakdowns within that. One thing I thought was super interesting was that its popularity, while lowering, did hold steady at every age group. So you didn't see like the floor fall out on young people necessarily, while it stayed strong with older people. It stayed fairly consistent across. And there's also some fascinating numbers just about other sports, both in relation to football and in relation to each other, and then just for the hearts and minds of the American populace. So maybe what I'll throw it out to each of you is maybe one kind of hot take from just looking at the numbers that kind of jumped out to you, and then we can dive into what we think some of the implications are. Steve?
Okay. The article I'm looking at for this, for the recent Gallup poll is from the Washington Post early lead, January 10th by Matt Bonesteel. And in here, he quotes, the hot take for me, football came out first. 37% of the surveyed people said football is their favorite sport. If you go back to the 2008 poll, which is, it's on the Gallup website, and this is from 2008, Gallup.com/poll, and it goes on. Football got 41%. So, that's, it's probably a little bit less, it's fallen a little bit less than the TV ratings have fallen, but it does show the margin is shrinking for football. I do have another kind of anecdotal thing. If you guys remember, was it the last show, the show before? I know I told you, Rich, at a minimum, that I go to a sports bar to watch some of these Reds games.
Yeah, you did tell me, yeah.
And I sent those photos out of the empty sports bar, nobody was in there. Well, last night I went back to that place, in part because I needed dinner, and in part because I was curious about what it would be like. And so I watched the first half of the the Titans New England game there, and it was largely the same. There were a couple people in there. There were 3 guys at the bar there sitting there with me. But it wasn't a packed house. A baseball team came in at one point in time, but by and large, it was Saturday night, big night, and there weren't a lot of people in there. Again, so I take that for what you will. But the news to me is, the NFL can take this and say, "Yay, we're the king," and they're going to conveniently ignore the fact that their ratings on this poll has dropped, 4%.
So the one thing that I find amazing is how far baseball was down on the list. You would think that baseball would probably be ahead of the NBA, but it was even lower than the NBA. And not to sort of derail, but I think the MLB has an issue on its hand. But football, I think football is still king. I'm actually also surprised that based on these numbers that the NBA was as low as it was, because there's this sort of thinking now that, the NBA is probably gaining some momentum on the NFL for audience and for viewers, but I don't think so. But I'm really surprised. I'm really surprised at the numbers for the NFL, for the NBA and the MLB as in relation to the NFL. But we've talked on this show a number of times about why we think the NFL is shrinking. The issue that I think is an intangible is that of all of the major sports, football is probably the most congenial sport. If families gather during football, friends make football a big part of their lives. Also, you have to look at the fantasy football element. And so I just think that there's some intangibles with football. We can list 20 things wrong with the NFL, but also there are some intangibles that are not taken into consideration when we're talking about the popularity of the sport.
You bring up a good point, and I think the congeniality of it stems from the fact that they own Sundays. Yeah. They've stolen. The NFL has stolen Sundays from church in many households. Literally, people skip church to watch football. Rich is raising his hand right now. You can't see it.
Praise the Lord.
What Rich is saying is he's told us off the air that during Redskins season, very often he does not go to church.
Or the early service, the 8 o'clock.
Yeah, right. Or you go early. Yeah. And I do the same thing. I wonder though if it's less about the game and more about the Sunday. And then that would lead you to, is it not wiser for the NFL to get rid of the Thursday night game? Get rid of the Saturday night game in late November after college football's ended, and put it all on Sunday and let people have Sunday. Would that not? Because I think you kind of get football fatigue a little bit, especially when you have a website and you do 2 shows a week and then you're writing about it and then you have to watch all these games. It gets to be a lot, and I wonder if the NFL would be better served by giving us less. Thoughts,
Chris? I agree completely. I've often said that if I was sitting in the league, if I was league commissioner sitting in the office and was on the crack team to think about how to stem some of these trends, that I would cut the Thursday games and the Saturday night games, and I would put the specialness back on Sunday and Monday nights and try to and I think that's an easy fix. I think what's really kind of fascinating in these poll numbers is I think it's definitely a glass half full, half empty, right? This answers nothing. You can spin this both ways.
Right.
What I do think is actually more interesting than ratings, because I do think with ratings, I think we're also in just a topsy-turvy media world. We don't know how to count this stuff anymore. I shared this out on Twitter, but last weekend we were literally streaming figure skating U.S. Nationals, my wife and daughter, with me with one eye on it. And while I was watching NFL playoffs, I'm like, and none of us were doing it on broadcast television. So I just think it's hard to separate out those media watching trends. But what's really fascinating about this Gallup poll, which is this to me is much more indicative when you look at popularity, and it also has some similar warning signs. So I'm not saying that as a Pollyanna way about football, but I do think it's a more honest look or a more statistical look at the popularity than we can deduce from TV ratings. But I also have to say I agree with you, Rich. I think the real loser here is baseball. I mean, I think that's just where the trend lines are fairly shocking. And I've said it for a while that I think, baseball is becoming hockey in America. In that it's highly regional, it's highly specialized, it's kind of for the nerd fan, right? The one that likes to go deep and really nerd out on it. And it really is figuring to. I think baseball could look very similar to the NHL in 15 or 20 years here, and it's staggering to me the multi-decade fall of baseball, and that's where I think the worst news is for any sport in America.
I'm not sure it's as bad as you're saying, because if you go back to the 2008 poll, and I just got it off my screen again. Okay, in 2008, baseball was at 10%. Well, in this poll, and that's 2008, in the 2017 poll, they're at 9%. That's a fall of 1%. Okay, that's not a tragedy. In fact, that's less than football has fallen. And basketball was at 9% and has gone up 2%. And so it's not a huge movement. It's not like baseball's fallen off a cliff. It's basically as popular as it ever was. Which is significantly less popular than football. What to me, the real point in this poll is the rise of soccer. Soccer in the 2008 poll was at 3%, meaning 3% of the people said when asked that soccer was their favorite sport. Well, it's up to 7%, which is still 7% is not a lot, but that's a 100%. 100% raise. I don't know what the raw numbers are, but that's a significant rise in the popularity of soccer in this country over the past 10 years. To me, that's far more news than the idea of baseball falling 1%.
So I also look at, and again, the NFL has a number of problems. Now, of all the major sports, the NFL has more issues. It seems like even though maybe the NBA may not have grown in popularity, it may have improved its image overall. Baseball, let me just say this. I also think baseball and probably the NFL do the best job. It's probably the best fan experience. If you go to baseball, there are tons of giveaways, stuff for kids. Basketball, same thing. That might be a little easier when you have 82 games and 162 of them as opposed to 16. The NFL's like, look, we ain't got time for just hand out foam fingers and shoot T-shirts into the stands. But on the other part of it, the NFL probably does a better job, or even tries to do a better job of marketing military. That's the NFL's lane, not necessarily families, but military. So I don't know.
As to the foam fingers and all that, I think it's, they're trying to draw in fans more than anything.
Yeah.
Because like when you try to pick the baseball game for your local team, you look at the schedule, and if you're bringing kids, especially, you're going, okay, we try to hit the bobblehead night because they want the Carlos Correa bobblehead or whatever the case may be. Football doesn't do that because they don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. Every game is going to sell out, no matter if they give away a foam finger or not. Baseball is trying to draw in customers by having a bobblehead night giveaway because maybe that's the game that you'll bring the kids to. So I think football doesn't do it because they don't have to spend the money on it more than anything else, in my opinion. I mean, it's a cynical business way of looking at it, but I think that's why. I mean, what would be the purpose of having a Jameson Crowder bobblehead night at FedEx Field? What would the Redskins get out of that?
Right.
They'd get absolutely nothing out of it because
No.
the same number of people would be there.
No, you're right.
I I still think there's more worry in there for baseball. I think the worry for baseball is that it's finding its new normal, which is that it's not, America's pastime. It's a niche sport in America. And I think the one interesting thing about football's probable decline, where the ratings are interesting, is that the rise of football was very much dominant on the rise of television. It's the best television sport, bar none. You could argue it's got the worst in-game experience. And it's the best TV experience. And the reality is TV is going through insane changes. And so I think those things are going to be completely linked. I think it probably means football finds a new normal, and it also means something around how we consume moving images over an electronic wire will find a new normal at some point too. But it is interesting that they are linked, and so to see them to link football and how we watch television is super fascinating. And I think it speaks to also baseball, why we see baseball and some of the other sports fall into a little bit of a track here. And I think the rise of soccer and basketball actually is fascinating because I do think it shows that they have a deeper cultural connection that we haven't necessarily from a sociological perspective fully understand the ramifications, and does speak to changing demographics within the United States. So it's interesting to look at kind of macro trends on a few levels and map the popularity. I mean, this would be not for us to babble about, but would be some fascinating things to study over time. The other thing is, I was shocked to see NASCAR. I mean, maybe 1%, but I would have guessed if I would have guessed if it would have risen since 2008. I would have guessed it rose from, I think, what it was 3 or something to somewhere 5 or 6. So to see that tick down, I also thought was a bit of an eyebrow raise.
Yeah, you know what though? I mean, sitting here looking at these polls and thinking about it, I'm not sure how good of a guide this Gallup poll really is. Because to me, what's more important is the money. How much money is the sport making is really what the leagues actually care about. And the NFL will flush the Gallup poll down the tubes as long as they get, continue to get billion-dollar TV, ratings. And like, for example, baseball. You mentioned baseball. Baseball's a long shot from being hockey. Baseball has billion-dollar network television contracts. Hockey, even the Stanley Cup Finals are barely on any network. You really have to be a hockey nut and have to really know where to find them. You'll catch Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals will be on ABC. And NBC. Okay. And that's really it. Meanwhile, Major League Baseball is a long way from that. They've got, ESPN packages and all sorts of things. So I think from an economic standpoint, baseball is light years ahead of the NHL, and the same with NASCAR. Yes, it was surprising to me that NASCAR has gone down in this poll, but I haven't looked at the economics of it, but nothing that I've seen tells me that NASCAR is making less money now than they were, or that the rate of growth has slowed. Because it's on TV a lot, and they're still selling tons of tickets to these races. And there's the whole culture. I'm not a NASCAR guy. I don't know if you guys are. It's not really my thing, particularly. But there's still a huge NASCAR culture out there, particularly in the South.
But that's
so I'm
a
not
niche.
Sure how much.
That's a niche. Mm-hmm. But that's also like you said with baseball. That's a niche sport or
Except
activity.
That baseball's making billions of dollars.
Yeah.
On TV networks, though.
But
hockey isn't.
Yeah.
And soccer isn't.
Yeah.
Soccer's making even less. Soccer's not on TV at all, basically.
I had a neighbor here in Maryland. Actually, I lived across the street from him, and never invited me over for any football games, Super Bowl, college. But when the Daytona 500 came on, that was like a big neighborhood draw. And I was like, that was his thing, and it just was in Maryland. So I went over to be hospitable, but I was my interest level was probably at 3%.
Yeah, basically, you'll eat his food.
Exactly, and
I
drink his drink.
I don't get the excitement of watching cars drive around in a circle personally. But I mean, it's if it's your thing, I'm happy for you. Enjoy it, and don't let me discourage you. I don't get it. But to me, the economic indicators are more important than these Gallup poll indicators. That's the root of what I'm trying to say.
But let's look at the grand scheme. This country offers 4 major sports and a couple of niche activities.
Okay.
People have an opportunity. If you look at it in the macro, people have an opportunity to enjoy what they like. There are some people that are hardcore NHL hockey fans.
Me?
Yeah. So, I've been to a couple of hockey. That's just not because I can't really identify with it. I've never played it. But, it's now I will say I will watch a playoff hockey game. I will not watch, game 12, Ottawa versus the Blackhawks. I won't watch that because I'm not that hardcore. But the big piece of it is I don't know if anybody has to win. To me, it's, who's watching. You market to your demographic and the people that are actually watching. And at the end of the day, if you're making money and you have a few and it's popular amongst those people who are hardcore, and it's a win-win.
Hey, Rich, question for you. And caution, racial question coming. Okay.
Yeah.
Is hockey more popular, less popular, or the same in the African American community in this country than it has been in years past? And I ask that because I have noticed more African American players in the NHL and like big name. There's a guy on like the Nashville Predators who's their star player, who's an African. I can't remember his name, but who's an African American player. What is the popularity of that sport in the African American community?
It's not very popular, but to your point, and I have a lot of friends who think this way. It's like my son is a really good athlete, but he can't break through in basketball. He can't break through in football. So let's try something a little bit different. So I have a lot of people who are steering their African American children to more non-traditional stuff that that we don't play, like not the stereotypical basketball or football. People are trying lacrosse. I have a couple of friends whose kids have scholarships for lacrosse and soccer.
I mean, the thing about hockey that, and this touches on race, but it's more socioeconomic, is that it's the most expensive youth sport to play. So it's got a lot of equipment that families have to buy for themselves. The youth teams, even different than youth football, they don't have that equipment, and it's actually more equipment than football. And just a sort of economies of scale type of thing. There just isn't that much ice time and rinks, and then you have to pay for lessons, etc. So it's got at the youth level, it's got a higher cost to family to participate, which has always been, especially in America. Canada is a much different thing, mostly because you just have a lot more surface ice.
Yeah.
And the culture of that.
Right.
So it's really interesting that at the entry level, hockey's hard for lots of people at middle class and lower socioeconomic to get in at the youth level.
Right. And the other
that's the same as baseball. Baseball I think has the same problem because you have to buy bats and all this equipment, and I think it's harder for people in a lower socioeconomic people of a lower socioeconomic background have a hard time playing youth baseball because for that reason there's a ton of travel and all that stuff, and what you play as a kid influences what you watch as an adult. For the 99.9% of us who didn't play, college or pro sports. And so I think baseball suffers from that. I think you're absolutely right. You guys, hockey suffers from that. Football a little less so because it's just easier to play, and particularly basketball.
To your point, there was an article in the Post not too long ago about the rise in popularity of soccer in the DMV area. Not surprising because that demographic is that population is rising, but the bigger issue is there's this big fight over fields, and whereas back in a few years ago you could find some abandoned football field and that they would guys would go play soccer, immigrants and people, not just immigrants, would go and play soccer, but now there's some political clout now where they're saying no, we don't want just some sandlot field, we want legit soccer playing surfaces. So I think there could also be, there could also be a racial element in the level of popularity with some of these sports. That I think that could also be a part of it too.
I think the fascinating thing that both of you said, and then we'll move on to our third topic, is that it's all this stuff is interesting, right? And so the Gallup popularity is a slice of interesting here. But I think what really is, in terms of the overall fiscal health, and that's probably growth potential of each sport, is what they do to monetize wherever they are in the popularity, right? So, and there's a large degree of variance and also the intelligence of the sports leagues and making the right moves, et cetera, to how to monetize where their audience is. And I think once you can, the Gallup stuff tells us one thing, but how are they doing in actually turning that level of popularity into monetization? And that becomes
well, that was my point.
That's a lot of factors. Yeah,
that was my point. It's the economics of it are more important. The NFL is still king on that. And if you just, we did several shows ago, I read out all the ESPN contracts, all these sports, and that's what tells the tale. That's what tells the tale. How much are these leagues paying to televise these various sports on their networks? In NFL, NBA, college football, and baseball are the king of those by a long shot. It's not even close. Those four.
Yes, for sure. Although I think chinks in their armor.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely chinks in the armor. And college basketball, the March Madness tournament makes billions, Also.
Yeah. That's very popular. I mean, again, I don't know if anybody's going to watch Baylor versus Western Kentucky in November, but the NCAA tournament is very popular.
Yeah, it's a niche thing up until March Madness. Yeah, for sure.
All right, so we're going to go on to our third and final topic of this episode, and that is we're going to take a look at the celebration rules. As you know, the NFL took away some of their end zone celebration rules that were with us since they banned the Fun Bunch. Was actually the spark that started the No Fun League rules. But this year they rolled off and were changed, and so we have seen much more celebrations and the end zone. So we're going to kind of give some takes on that and see if we like them, if we think it's helping, if it's hurting. Rich, what are you thinking about this year in celebration?
I think most are stupid. I think most are dumb. I think that I thought that the spirit of the rule would be that there would be more spontaneous individual celebrations. For example, when Vernon Davis was penalized for shooting a three-pointer or doing a finger roll over the goalpost, which is you're catching a slant route in stride and you just happen to go up and finger roll that makes sense. But, Duck Duck Goose by the Vikings and, stuff, Juju Smith-Schuster's antics with reenacting a fight between a teammate and some of this other stuff is excessive. If you didn't score the touchdown, now I'll say this, having said that, I cannot be hypocritical because I was around in the Fun Bunch days. And the Fun Bunch was the 80s version of what's going on now. And I enjoyed it as a fan then. Alvin Garrett and all of that. I enjoyed it then. So I can't be hypocritical. But I thought some of it's kind of funny. But I just thought that the NFL they were making the rule for more individual leeway rather than these skits and productions.
Yeah, the Fun Bunch was natural to me.
Yeah,
it's just a bunch of guys who were jumping up, and it just came across as more natural to me. I don't know, and maybe I'm. But
not if you didn't come off. Not if you came off the bench. I mean, not if you weren't in the game and you just came off the bench to do the. Maybe
so. I mean, maybe it's just me being a biased Redskins fan, but I'm with you. I don't like a lot of it. The Eagles had some organized thing. The organized team events seems stupid to me. But from the interesting part of this is the business aspect of it. Because the NFL has a reputation of being the no fun league, and they've got all these problems. We've hit on ad nauseum on this show. And so I think this was one small attempt to make the NFL more appealing to fans. Which would in turn hopefully make more people watch. If nothing else, to see what the antics are in the end zone. And so maybe at some point that'll be help business. To me, it's kind of like putting a paper towel in front of a fire hose. But I think that's why they changed the celebration. Well, it's certainly not to make the players, happy. They couldn't care less what the players think at all about anything, basically. This, to me, was to make it more appealing to the fans. Although, again, it's a it's a mere pebble in an ocean of problems.
I agree with all those things. I'd say it's a little bit more helpful than you might suggest, Steve, in that I do think it helps to add a little bit of fun. Now, maybe the mountain of non-fun this year has muted it, and you know some of that you couldn't have predicted necessarily. But I do think it helps to put a little bit of fun back into it. I also think it just helps the league not look so hypocritical when the league was literally selling the celebrations that they were flagging on the field through video games and through NFL.com. So even one thing to wipe away that hypocrisy, which had been really glaring over the last 5 to 10 years, that's helpful. Also, I think I'm a little bit... One thing I don't think can be minimized is that when they were illegal or they were more me-oriented, so maybe I'll speak a little bit against you, Rich, in that what I've liked about this year is that they've been less egotistical and then less dangerous. And so the biggest critique is that they're dumb or corny. The NFL will take that 10 out of 10 times because you're not seeing throat slashes. You're not seeing me first wide receivers with Sharpies in their socks. Yeah. So
who
duck,
cares?
duck, goose. You know, like
me? Really? I mean, I don't care if they do a throat slash gesture. Who cares?
You don't
Doesn't
care,
mean
Steve,
anything.
but the league does.
You know, and I don't care
there
if
was a conversation for the week between games.
I mean, but
And
it's
they
a
got
ridiculous
fined.
conversation to have. So what? You know, and Chad Johnson pulls a Sharpie out of a shoe, out of his sock. Who cares?
You're being stupid. This is about the league's perception. They don't care what you think. They care they don't have
I'm the only voice they need to
doing
care
throat
about.
Cuts. Yeah, Steve, fine, but that doesn't
Or Antonio Brown twerking.
Yeah, they're getting if corny is the biggest thing people are saying about their celebrations, the NFL's already won.
I just don't think any of it's that big of a deal. I don't think any of it. Go ahead, Rich.
But here's the thing, though, Steve. Now I know you're going to disagree with this, but I have to applaud the NFL for this. At least they're trying to meet their personnel halfway.
Oh my God.
Well, no, I mean, come on. I mean, the players, feel stifled or what. I mean, maybe they were trying. Don't get me wrong. I am not suggesting that the NFL doesn't have a labor issue. I'm just suggesting there was no harm in giving an inch on this issue.
No, there's not. I mean, you're right. I'm just playing the cynical, I'm just playing the opposite end of this. But I don't think any of it's that big a deal. To be perfectly honest, I think they ought to let these guys do whatever celebration they want within reason. I think it's ridiculous to throw flags that cost teams real yardage on the basis of some dumb, celebration in the end zone. I think that whole concept is stupid. Just let them do their thing, and if it gets out of hand, let them get flagged. There's no reason to put the celebration version of the catch rule in place. You can't finger roll a basketball, but you can play duck, duck, goose, and, you can high five, but you can't have some sort of organized, everybody jump together. It's ridiculous. It is utterly stupid. Just let them do their thing, and if it gets out of hand, then the refs need to stop
Here's where the NFL, this is where the NFL is dumb. Okay, help me with this guy. I hate the fact that you're able to spin the ball after every catch. That's delay of game. That's ridiculous. That's stupid. It's dumb. I don't get how you allow that.
It doesn't bother me. It's your opinion.
I know. It's just stupid.
Yeah, it's just your thing. Yeah,
it's my thing. That's my thing.
No, I think it's actually, but I actually think you actually make a fair point. Like, because those are actually what you could say is hurting the game, right? It's slowing the game down. It's delay of game. Whereas the end zone is like whatever.
Yeah.
They just cut into a TV timeout anyway. Also, celebrating a 6-yard pass for first down.
There you go.
Is a lot different than scoring 7 points.
Yeah.
With the spinning the ball. I mean, you're down 10. You're down 10, and you caught a 3rd and 4, and you want to spin the ball. Get out of here.
Was that Santana Moss that did that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do agree with you
and the head
that
floss.
to that extent.
The ear-to-ear head floss.
Yeah, I do agree to you with that extent. I mean, if it's slowing down the game and you're not celebrating,
here it is now in the game now. I'm looking at the Vikings
you're
doing
watching
just
it?
now.
So I agree with you there, but I just think I think the bottom line is maybe they are trying to meet the players halfway, but it's really about making the game more appealing to the fans, to make it more popular. I think the NFL needs to relax about these celebrations. Just let them do their thing, and as long as it doesn't get too nutty, everything will be fine. That's my opinion of it.
But maybe they should have end zone judges like in figure skating or other judge sports where you get bonus points or penalties for the quality of your celebration.
Yeah.
Could you imagine that?
Let's not.
But it would have been interesting to see you take the supercharged politics out of this season's NFL. I actually think that the celebrations would be a bigger story, even if it was a bit of a fluff piece. I think if everything else wasn't so weighted and heavy and annoying, I think you'd see more features and you'd see a little bit more like as the fun back. But to your point earlier, like there's such a whatever cloud over it that any of those kind of stories in a normal year that may bubble up for whatever reason are muted.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right. What can you say?
Yep. Well,
all right, so we're all kinds of mixed up on celebrations, and I think our general point is that they really don't matter one whit either way. But I actually think I think the coordinated ones are ridiculous and somewhat entertaining.
Yeah.
I did not. It's not when I saw that the rule changed. I did not expect. That's not what I thought would be the.
I didn't
end
expect I'd
result.
see the Vikings playing Duck Duck Goose. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I know. Right. 1940s street games have become suddenly way more popular.
And I don't get why
end
that's
zones.
even a celebration, for that matter.
Yeah,
What happened to just spiking the ball in the end zone and walking to the sideline?
Or, Billy White Shoes Johnson, if you guys are old enough to remember him,
sure.
that was radical back in those days.
And why can't they just be Barry Sanders and turn and hand the ref the ball?
Mark Gastineau's sack dances and the Icky Shuffle and all of that stuff.
The Icky Shuffle.
Yeah.
We're all dating
one
ourselves by remembering that.
Yeah.
One hit wonder.
Yeah.
All right, well, that brings us to a close of this episode of IJB. You can find us on the Hogside Network, of course. Steve, you can find on the Hogside Twitter handle if you want to get at us through there. Rich, where can they find you?
They can find me at DiscoQ, DISCOQUE at Twitter.
All right, and you can find me at ChrisLarry33. And, we'd love to get some more engagement with you all on any of these topics. I've also, this is probably inside baseball stuff, but I almost wonder if we need our own Twitter account at some point, or maybe a hashtag, so we could separate out some of the conversations that circle around our show. I have been noticing a little bit of a...
Let's attack that off the air, but, hashtag Steve doesn't have time for that.
All right, so we will debate that, but if you want to weigh in on anything we've talked about, please get us at the Hogsty Twitter handle, and we will be back in 2 weeks.
All right, guys. Have a great one.
Talk to you later.
Championship weekend.
Yes.